Hello, welcome to Rocky Biochemistry. In today's video, I'll be showing you an easiest way of writing lab reports. So if you have been struggling on how lab reports is actually written, then you have to worry no more. I'm going to show you a simple and then easiest way of doing this. So let's begin. So lab report writing is mostly done after a scientific experiment, and we do this in order for it to serve as a means of communicating with any other scientist, so that when someone picks your work, he or she can just know what you actually did and then correlate or relate it to the existing literature. And it also demonstrates your understanding of the scientific methods used in the lab experiment. So when you are to just do the experiments, leave and go without writing any reports, it might be that you don't really understand what you did. You just memorize some method somewhere and then you demonstrated it. But by writing a report, it shows that you really understand whatever you've done. So let's ask ourselves this question. How do we write lab reports? How do we write lab reports? So we mostly write lab reports by using either textbooks or an article. So as for me, I will recommend the use of articles as compared to the use of textbooks. It's not like it is bad to use textbooks, but the fact is that when you use articles for writing, it becomes a bit easier as compared to the use of textbooks, because mostly articles have internal references embedded in them already. So for every sentence that you will pick, you will easily get an internal reference to correspond it to. And also at the end of every article, there are the external references. So when you use an article for your experiment, you can just go and use the external references when you reach that part or when the need arises, unlike the use of textbooks. So if you are still interested in the use of textbooks, then I think I should recommend some textbooks for you to use for writing your lab reports. So some textbooks are the Leninger Principles of Biochemistry. We have the Stryer Biochemistry, the Spencer Biochemistry, the Fundamentals of Biochemistry by Charles W. Pratt, and a lot. There are a lot of biochemistry textbooks. So I'm going to show you some sites where you can get biochemistry textbooks from. So you can go to pdfdrive.com. When you get to pdfdrive.com, you just have to type biochemistry textbooks and you'll see a list of books, and then you will select from it what you think it will help you. Or let's say you just check the previews and then see which book best suits your report. And then aside the use of pdfdrive.com, you can use Library Genesis, Open Library, Bookborn, Project Gutenberg, and a lot. You can get a lot of other sites to download your biochemistry and then other textbooks from. So aside the use of textbooks, someone too might be interested in the use of articles. Someone like me, I am much more interested in the use of articles. So I have to recommend some sites whereby you can get your articles from. So you can check sites like googlescholar.com. When you check Google Scholar, you just type the topic. You just type the title of your report, the report that you are going to work on. You just type the title into the search engine of Google Scholar, and then after keying it in, a lot of recommended articles will come out for you to use them for your report writing. And aside the use of Google Scholar, you can use PubMed, academia.edu, you can use American Scientific, Medline Plus, and etc. But above all, the one that is easiest to use is Google Scholar. When you key in the topic into the Google Scholar and that particular work is found in, let's say, academia.edu or PubMed, the search engine will direct you to these sites so that you can download them directly from there. Now let's continue with parts of lab reports. So for lab report writing, there are some specific chronological order or a structure that we follow in writing it, and this is similar to every lab report. So the first thing that we have to consider is the date, and then followed by the title, the aims, the introduction, the materials and methods, the resource, discussion, conclusion, and your references. So these form parts of the lab report. So let's start with the date. For the date, it indicates the exact day on which the labs was done. It is not like the day that you are writing your lab report, but the exact day you carried the lab. So if, let's say, the lab was done on Wednesday and you are writing your lab report on Saturday, you don't have to quote the date of the Saturday, but you have to quote the Wednesday's date in your report. So the date is mostly written or typed on the upper right corner of the page. So after the date, you move on to your title. So the title expresses what you have studied. So for instance, qualitative test on carbohydrates. It is very brief and then very short. You don't have to be beating about the bush. You don't have to be doing any form of explanation when you are talking about your title. You have to be direct, straightforward, catchy enough, and then simple enough. So after your title, you then have to move on to your aims. So the aims has to do with what you are going to do in the experiment, the specific things that you are going to do in your experiment. So for instance, for the qualitative test on carbohydrates, it is something broad because there are a lot of qualitative tests available. You can carry out Molish, Ferlin, and then the rest. So if, let's say, in the experiment you will be testing for the presence of carbohydrates by using the Molish test, it becomes an aim. So in your aim, you can just write to determine the presence of carbohydrates in sample solutions using Molish test. It becomes an aim for you. Or let's say you want to test the presence of reducing sugars using Ferlin's test. So you can just quote that to detect the presence of reducing sugars using Ferlin test. That's what you should write. You shouldn't be saying a lot of lengthy things. Just be straightforward and then be precise about what you are going to do in the experiment. So I think I've given these examples already. That is to determine the presence of carbohydrates using Molish test. I've given this example already. And now let's move on to the introduction. That is where a lot of work lies in, and most of the marks are also found in the introduction session here. So for the introduction session, it is somehow like the literature review. You have to say a lot. You have to talk more about whatever you know about the topic. What you are going to do, you have to say a lot. You have to tell us more about what you know about the topic that you are going to write on. So it establishes the context that is needed to understand about the topic. And mostly, we write our introduction in a funnel inverted manner. Funnel inverted manner in the sense that we start with the broader picture, that is the wide or the general knowledge about the topic, and then you narrow yourself to the specific work that you are going to do in your experiment. So for the qualitative test on carbohydrates, for instance, we know carbohydrates to be a biomolecule. So you can start the introduction by talking about what biomolecules are. You talk about the various biomolecules that we have, and then you narrow yourself to what carbohydrates are. You account for the various bonds in the carbohydrates as well as the elements that are found in carbohydrates. So after all these, you branch and then talk about the various tests that we can carry out. I mean, those qualitative tests about carbohydrates that we can carry out. You talk about all these tests, and then after talking about them, you limit yourselves to those tests that you are going to carry out for the meantime. I mean, what you are going to carry out in your study. You have to talk about those tests too, and then let us know what is behind it. I mean, what accounts for positive tests or negative tests. All these has to come in your introduction. So, as I said, it is written in funnel inverted manner. That is from the broad or general view to the specific study that is in focus. We should also take note that for the writing of the introduction, everything should be in the present tense. Everything has to be in the present tense. And it is very advisable to use articles for writing your introduction. The reason why I'm saying this is that for articles, they mostly comes with their references. And for the writing of introduction, we have to include internal references, since whatever sentence you are using, you are not the owner of the sentence. That is, the sentence was actually made by someone. So you have to give credits to the person. So by using article, you'll be able to get your internal references. And for the materials and methods, here we answer a question like, what did you do? Or how did you do it? That is what we are going to answer. So for instance, when you are doing a test on qualitative test for carbohydrates, you did some measurements into the test tubes before adding your reagents. So you have to account for all these things. You have to let us know what you actually did in the lab. So for instance, you poured 4 ml of solution A into a test tube. You can't just start the sentence by saying that 4 ml of solution A was poured into test tube B. No, this is a wrong statement when it comes to lab report writing. It is not like the statement is wrong, but you are going to lose marks for that. We don't begin a sentence with a number when it comes to the writing of lab reports. We don't begin a sentence with a number. We begin every sentence with a word. So you should be mindful about it. So you might be asking yourself that then, if I pour 4 ml of solution, or let's say reagent A, into solution B, then how am I going to write it? You can just write it this way. By using a pipette, 4 ml of solution A was transferred to solution B. That becomes so much simple. And for the writing of materials and method, you should sound in passive voice. That is, everything has to be written in past tense. And then after your materials and method, you have to move on to the results. So for the results, it let us know the observations made from your experiment. Whatever observation that you made from your experiment, you have to account for it in your results. So mostly we use tables and then charts to represent them. We mostly use tables and charts to represent our observations. So when it comes to the use of tables to represent these observations, we name the tables on top of them. So you can just state it this way. Let's say table 1.0, and then you give the title of the table before you draw your table. But in the case of the use of figures and then charts, you have to draw the charts, and then after drawing the charts, you name it below. So after drawing it, you can just write figure 1.0, and then you name the chart that you have drawn. And then after the results, we get to one crucial part, that is the discussion. For the discussion, it describes how your results relates to existing works. As I said, every work has already been done. So the experiment that has already been done, you have to correlate your work to these experiments. These literature works that are already in existence. You have to relate your work to these ones to find out whether they are in line with them or they are not in line with them. And for your discussion, you have to also describe the actual mechanisms that is behind your observations. So let's say in your test, you find a positive test to be attributed by a color change from colorless to green color. So you have to let us know what is actually going on. That is changing the color from colorless to to the green color that I'm talking about. You have to let us know the actual reaction ongoing between the reagent and your solution. Because if you don't do this, you are going to lose marks. You don't have to just state it this way that from my experiment, solution A was it was observed that solution A contains, let's say, carbohydrates because of the color change from green, or let's say colorless to green. You have to account for the actual reaction that is ongoing there. That is the one most important thing that we should do when we are writing our discussion. Anytime that you are writing your discussion, try and relate your figures, your observations, to existing literature. to find out whether you are in line with them or you are not in line with them, and also describe the mechanisms involved in various observations. So, after writing your results and the discussion, then the next thing to do is to conclude. For the conclusion, it just summarizes your findings from your experiment. Whatever you do, a summary of it forms your conclusion. You don't have to talk much about this. You just have to be brief and then short and then specific about what you did. So let's say at the end of the experiment, you find solution A and then solution B to be showing positive results. So you can just conclude that at the end of the experiment, solution A and B was found to be carbohydrates. That's all. You don't have to talk more and then write a whole lot of lengthy paragraphs. Just be specific about whatever you are doing. Now to the references, this gives a lot of people headache. Yes, and for the reference writing, it just gives a list of people mentioned in the report. So since you are not the owner of the sentences that you use for your introduction and some part of your discussion, you have to give credits to the person who actually did the work. So we group references into two. That is the internal referencing and then the external referencing. So for the internal referencing, we normally add them to the introduction and the discussion session. So if you want to write your internal reference, you just write the name of the author and the year of the publication. So there are two formats of writing internal referencing. It is either you bring it in front of, or let's say before the sentence or after the sentence. So let's start with those that we write at the end of the sentence. For those ones at the end of the sentence, you just have to write the surname of the author, then you bring comma, and then the year in which he or she published the paper. But if there are two, you have to bring and to join these two names, and then you bring your comma before the year. But in the case of having more than two people doing the work, you have to write all of them their names. You have to write all of them their names in the external referencing. But for the internal reference, you have to write the name of one of the authors, and then you bring the word ital to represent the remaining people. So let's go to those ones that we write before the sentence. So if you want to do internal reference before the sentence, you can just write something like according to, then you bring the name of the person whom you are using his or her article, and then you bring the year. So let's say according to Lewis 2000, then you continue with the sentence. Or let's say according to Singer and Nicholson, the year will come, then you continue. Or according to McMurray et al., that is in the case whereby we have more than two people doing the test. So now let's move on to external referencing. This one gives a detailed information about the articles used or the articles that you actually used in doing or writing the reports. You have to give credits to the authors of all these articles. So here we write the name of anyone at all who actually partake in the study. His or her name should be included. So we divide external referencing into book referencing and then the journal referencing. So for the book referencing, you write the name of the author, then the title, edition, publication, the city of publication, and then lastly the country and then the state in which the person lives in. So the format is somehow similar, but here you write the name alone, then you bring the year before you go to the topic, and then you write your publication, town or city, country, and then the page. So in case you are forgetting, just take note of this particular example and then use it as a guide anytime you are making your references. This is another typical example. That is when you have more than one person. You have to write the person's only one name and then you add the first name of them. You'll be writing them until you get to the finest person. That is when you get there, you have to bring your dots and then the year will come. But before you get to the final person, you bring the word end to conjugate the sentence. But here, not comma anymore. Now let's move on to journal referencing. For journal referencing, it is somehow similar to book referencing, but here you just write the name of the author, then let's say the name of the author, then you move on to the year, the journal that you're using, then you get to the publication, and then you add your volume as well as the page numbers. So we should also take note that anytime you're writing internal referencing, the volume has when we get to know that the volume has some numbers attached to them, then we should put the number in brackets after the volume. So in this case, 541 bracket to P1. So the one here becomes our issue number, and then the volume itself is the volume 543. Thank you very much for watching this particular video.